Good afternoon. How are you doing? I was like very tired in the morning. All these lectures is really fun. Let me just start with like how decentralized markets are everywhere. So traditionally, labor markets. I guess I can wait just a little bit more. Okay, let me just restart it. So I just want to mention, like decentralized markets are everywhere. So Rasmus studies like a labor markets, like it's this traditional decentralized market. And transportation, like shipping, international trade is another good example. Lots of business-to-business transactions. There's like a centralized market. There's a price set in the market. It's not like that. You just like contact your business partner and then get the transactions. When it comes to assets, used car markets, or even the new car markets, because if you think about buying a new car, have you bought any car yourself? But even if you're buying a new car, like a price is something that you can negotiate. Like there's not like a set price. So even used and new cars and houses, also decentralized market. And it's highly differentiated. And then firm capital assets like equipment or plants, also decentralized market. And bonds and derivatives are also transacted in the decentralized markets. There are so many decentralized markets, it makes no sense that a lecture talks about the whole thing. I'm going to focus on decentralized asset markets when transaction data is available. So if you don't have transaction data, it may not be that useful, but I'm just going to assume that you have all the transactions, price, quantity, and timing is observed, and then we're going to go from there. And if you have not that great data, suppose you may not have timing, then you have to think about what needs to be, what corner has to be cut. When it comes to financial assets, I talked about bonds and derivatives. Yes? Yeah, I think like a market that's like a stock exchange market, that's an example of centralized market. Anything that deviates from that, I kind of consider that as a centralized market. But I think for that question, in fact, let me go directly here. So I think two key features of decentralized market is that there's a search and bargaining involved. So if you want to buy and sell an asset, you have to search your trading partner. Oftentimes it's a dealer, but you need to find a trading partner. And then once you meet the partner, you negotiate the price. And intermediaries, because this requires some cost, there's a trading frictions. Oftentimes there's an intermediary involved. Again, in municipal bonds market, it's a dealer. So these two things characterize decentralized market. So housing market would be an example. Right, so you need to find someone who wants to sell the house. I'm looking for a house to buy. Can't find a house. And and then I'm going to negotiate the price, and then I'm going to hire a broker. Right? In financial markets, decentralized market, we call it over-the-counter market, is very prevalent. So in terms of the security supply, dark blue, so which is equity on exchange and treasury, electronic treasury transactions. Dark blue, if you add this dark blue security supply amount, the rest, like mortgage-related, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, if you add all that, like a light blue is as big as, or actually bigger than the dark blue. So over-the-counter market, even for the financial markets, is very prevalent. So with that, what are the kind of research questions can you ask? I think existing literature has asked questions like, what are the effects of search costs, search frictions on allocation of assets, prices, or market power of intermediaries, or welfare. And then also like $1,000,000 question, what do intermediaries do? I guess you can ask them, but we want to do more than just asking people what they do. Like what is really the role they play? What is the extra value they add to the market? And given that there's a possibility of centralized platform as opposed to decentralized market transactions, is it a good idea to shift all the transactions to a centralized platform? And if that's the case, how shall we do this? I think these are the typical questions I have asked, and then some of you may add to the list, I hope. And then moving forward, I kind of want to think about like why dynamics may matter. So, typically if you can answer your questions in a static model, people may say, do it, like you don't need to go for dynamics. So like if the prior is I want to do static model, but then for certain questions, I really have to do dynamics. And so what are these conditions that we have to go through all these calculations? So I thought about the reasons why. So the last two is pretty straightforward, right? So learning by doing. If there's some like intermediaries learn by trading about the market conditions or who will be interested in these transactions or what the price is going to be because the transactions are not very often. So knowing the market price would be useful. So learning by doing or knowing more clients is useful, network effects. Or there's a long-term relationship between intermediaries and the investors. So, okay, there can be some dynamics there. And also, especially if you're concerned about like how long you hold an asset or liquidity. Like if I want to buy and sell, how long it takes to buy and how long it takes to find someone. In that kind of considerations, so when you think about the value of holding an asset, it doesn't only include how much of cash flow you're going to get, like the expected value of the cash flow. On top of that, you think about, oh, I may want to sell it at some point. And in that case, search cost is going to enter into my expected value, right? And then, the search cost or how long it takes for me to find another partner is an equilibrium object. So that's going to be all included in your dynamic model. And also, the second bullet point is just a typical one, which doesn't have to be in a dynamic model, but overall, when you found someone, like you may not transact right away because I might find someone else in the future that's better. So that needs to be also taken into account, and that's going to be equilibrium object as well, how much I'm going to get if I wait. Having said that, dynamic structural estimation of decentralized asset market has been so-called underdeveloped. A lot of calibration papers, but not many structural estimations, so maybe this is a room for future research. So I think the most, I would say, seminal paper in that direction is Gavatsa's 2016 Econometric paper. So the papers, I focus on those that use transaction level data. And so he uses secondary market business jet aircraft transaction data, and then think about welfare impacts of intermediaries. My co-author, Julia, and her co-authors was thinking about dealers learning. And then the reason you need a structural model is to think about the market transparency policies impact. And then Cohen and Cohen paper looks at the fact that, there are very, very frequent traders and not very frequent traders. And if you regulate very frequent traders, it may have some unintended consequences in terms of liquidity in the market. So that's what they studied in the Sterling's corporate bond market. And Pinter and Nusulu's recent paper, these are all working papers, by the way. The last three are not published. Looking at the welfare impacts of search frictions in the context of UK government and corporate bond market, and they have amazing data. So that's what I know in terms of literature. Again, what you can see is that structural analysis is important here. One, because they look at the welfare impacts mostly, or in a second, they're counterfactuals. And also, back in these papers, always think about liquidity. That's the main thing. That's why dynamics is important. Having said that, there are many other approaches, right? So first, you could do reduced form. So I kind of have this abstract title of the paper and an abstract here. So role of trading frictions in real asset markets. One could, ask that question in a structural way, but this paper's focus was how the techniques of the market affects asset allocations and prices. So typically, effect of A on B, reduced form works. So you don't have to go for structural work for that kind of questions. This is a Tobias Sal's paper. If you look at it, this is basically role of intermediaries in the context of New York City's waste trading. So businesses, they have waste. They have to find someone who's going to take the waste. And that market, for that market, basically the intermediaries has a direct impact of lowering search costs, but indirect impact because now a lot of people are using the broker, so that will have a price impact. So the paper is about that. And this paper is structural estimation paper, but doesn't use dynamic approach. Why do you think that this paper doesn't have to use dynamic approach? You kind of look at the abstract, think about the question, a little bit of setting. I sell the waste. I ask someone to take my waste, and that's it. I don't have to think about the waste trader is going to do something, and I'm going to buy the waste back. It's not nothing like that is happening, right? So when it comes to dynamics, I talk about trade. If I buy asset, I think about selling at some point, right? There's no learning by doing. There's no long-term relationship. Most importantly, this paper doesn't think about liquidity. How long does it take for me to find a partner is not there. Okay? So static is fine. And also JF's paper, search frictions and market power. In the mortgage market, right, I think? Yes. So how the search frictions affect the market power. And then you see that intermediary seems to have market power. Is that coming from search frictions versus brand loyalty? Again, I get the mortgage thing done. I don't have to do it again. So also static works. So not all decentralized markets have to be dealt with dynamics involved, but a lot of questions also involve dynamics. So I hope that this lecture will be useful for you. So the outline today is that I want to start with a very simple model of decentralized market. And then I want to characterize equilibrium and talk about estimation of the model. I have parentheses for identification because identification is not clear there. So I'm going to talk about why that's the case. And then for future research, because here are people who can do amazing future research, I will give you some ideas that can be extended for compared to what we have now. And then as a kind of application, I'll talk about my paper with Julia. And this is in the context of municipal bond market. I'll just really briefly talk about what the paper is about, and then just go dive in the model. Now that you have a simple model, I think it'll be easy for you to understand the model here because we have a lot of bells and whistles on top of the simple model. And then I'll talk about estimation of the model. Okay. How does the plan sound? Okay. All right. So let's start. So I'm going to start with a continuous time model. That makes things easier because at any point in time, only one thing is going to happen, keeping everything else constant, so that makes our life easier. Infinite horizon. Actually, our model is finite horizon, but let's work with the infinite horizon first, because for the infinite horizon case, we have the equilibrium very clean. So we'll go with the infinite horizon. We'll start with a fixed supply, long-lived asset, amount A, that's just fixed. Think about a continuum of investors. So one investor's decision has no impact on the market. There's a really little atom in this continuum. Measure is normalized to 1, which is nothing special because in this model, investors talk. So if you just think about assets. So suppose you have a bond. Then each period, at each point in time, you may get some interest. That is going to be incorporated in you. Why would people have different valuations? You may think the valuations could be the same, but then depending on each person's portfolio, maybe you may value this bond more than the other people. So that's where the heterogeneity occurs. And also from the modeling point of view, I see, some people buy and some people sell. That happens all the time. That should probably come from the valuation differences. So that. Last point, we have the continuous distribution of the value as opposed to discrete. You can go discrete. It's more elegant to go with the continuous one. And then I'll also talk about how that helps us a little bit. In fact, if you make it discrete, actually make it easier in other ways. So you have some choice. You can go for discrete valuations or continuously distributed evaluation. And that is drawn from F nu. And then the value may change. So for example, you're holding lots of bonds. And then suddenly you found a beautiful house you suddenly want to buy. Then you have to sell the bond. That is alpha probability. And then the investors, they're randomly matched. So here, that's an assumption. It could be directed search or different types of match. But right now, we're going to go for randomly matched. You're going to meet the other person at a rate lambda. When they meet, then they're going to trade with a price P and quantity Q using Nash bargaining. So by having Nash bargaining, we are already assuming complete information. I know what you have. I know what your valuation is. You know mine, and then we're going to find a P and Q. Bargaining parameter, I'm going to set it as 1/2. The only reason for that is that usually in other models, you will have seller's bargaining power as rho, buyer is 1 minus rho. Here, there are all those investors, they meet, and then depending on the valuations and asset holdings, sometimes I can be the buyer, sometimes I can be a seller. I don't want to keep track of that too much, So just making things easier, let's just go with the rho. Okay. So in our applications, dealers and investors transact all the time. So there is no way investors and investors transact. So I can easily come up with a bargaining power for the dealer versus investor. Here is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to go with rho is equal to 1/2. And then discounting factor rho, delta. So you see that some of the parameters, some of the things here are oranges. These are the model parameters that we are interested in. Yeah? Just so that you understand the whole thing. Model parameters are there, they already talked about. And then equilibrium objects will be trading rules, P and Q, and equilibrium asset holding distribution. So what that is that if I'm going to meet someone, in expectation, then what is the distribution of that someone's asset holding A and valuation U will be? Here, I'm not a theorist. You guys are probably not theorists. Given that, whole purpose of thinking about theory is what I'm going to do with the structural estimation. Then our focus is there equilibrium? Is that unique? If so, how much can I characterize it so that I can use it for my estimation? And what do we observe about equilibrium objects? Because we want to be elegant, I'm not talking about X and what's observed, what's not observed right now. But then when it comes to identification, we'll talk about that. So what we observe with equilibrium objects is important. And given what we observe, are we going to have a mapping? Hopefully 1-to-1. If not, if unfortunate, we'll deal with it. Given the situation, we'll think about the estimator, how we're going to build the estimator. So we'll talk about those things today. Okay, so value function. So investor state, I'm going to denote as Y. So then asset holding A, again, the valuation U. So I'm going to start with the steady state. Again, for our paper, we're doing finite horizon. It's not steady. It doesn't have to be steady state here, but here we're going to go with the steady state. So investors' value function, so the way you can think about this is that, okay, next, for this particular period, the next period, what I'm going to get during that transition, I'm going to get my utility right away. And then with probably alpha, I want to buy a house or something, so I get the liquidity shock, and my value changes. And with lambda, I'm going to meet someone, and then we're going to have a transaction. If I have a transaction, then I'm going to get Q, A plus Q asset, and my valuation. You see that because it's continuous time, value is here, the whole, it's the same value. I don't think about changing. Changing was happening that instant. I'm going to buy it, my asset will change, I'm going to pay the price, and my current utility, current value function was there, that difference. You read that? And then price and quantity is typical Nash bargaining. Everyone follows a value function. Any questions so far? No? Okay, now let's talk about the value Nash bargaining a little bit more. So with the Nash bargaining thing, Q always maximizes the joint surplus. And then P divides the total surplus according to the bargaining parameter rho. So I know that we have 1/2, but then in case you want to use it for other stuff, I wanted to put it in rho. Yeah. What's the nice thing about solving this is that now I can write the value function with the value functions alone. I don't have to have PQs anymore. So this is my value function. Yeah?
My outside option in the Nash bargaining is to keep what I have right now.
Yes.
And Y prime is what?
Y prime is my partner's, my trading partner's state. So A prime and U prime. Anything else? Yes? No income effects. Utility function can be very flexible to include. P is the price. Let's see. So you want to have some function of P instead of just a P, minus some function of P as opposed to P. I guess you could do that.
You would get the close form.
I don't know. It may be possible. That's a good point. Yeah. We don't think about that. It's an asset transaction, so we'll just minus P. The reason that utility function can be somewhat, we'll talk about that later, but we can, why is it minus P? It's a good point. We'll think about that, yeah.
In general, are you thinking that you can compare utilities across the two individuals? So as they're engaging in the Nash, how are we thinking about how they're pricing units? They would be doing it in terms of their marginal utilities, but how are they trading them back and forth in the Nash bargaining process? It's not that you can't do it in Nash, but you have to be a little bit careful about how they're exchanging utility between each other.
But here people on both sides of the market. You're both a buyer and a seller.
Yeah.
But they're not the same individuals, right?
They're not the same. Yes, that's right. But
Tomorrow they're gonna be more different.
But it's two different individuals with two different utility functions, right?
yes.
So you have to be careful about how you're thinking about their marginal utilities and what is a dollar worth as they're exchanging.
Yeah, it really goes back to the.
Straightforward.
Yes, yes, yeah, I understand. I think it really goes back to the micro foundation of my utility function. Let's go back to that when it comes to the utility. I'm going to specify utility function later. Yeah, I think so this utility function that we're going to use is based on Usulu's 2019 Econometric paper. And I think he also had a hard time like justifying the utility function being particular form, where they're coming from, how shall we think about this? Yeah, but yes. Okay, let me close the model equilibrium, so which would be market clearing and distribution of investor types. So, this the distribution fee of asset holding and the valuation. That is the then it has market should be cleared. So if you integrate over everything, that's going to be A, and then stationarity condition should hold. So like at any instant, asset holding will change because you have transactions. Right? You might buy or you might sell, and then your asset, your valuation will change. So those things are all incorporated in the stationary. So those changes should be equal to 0 because it's stationary state. Okay, so we just, yes? Yes, that's a great question. In this case, yes. So I have put some weird things here and there so that it's going to happen. So one thing that you can see, actually this is here. So your asset holding can be negative infinity. So if you look at this, like I'm integrating over asset of the other guy, A prime, and the value of the other guy, nu prime, integrating over minus infinity and plus infinity. So I could have negative asset. So when it comes to you have a higher value and I'm gonna low value, then there can be transactions happening, and then I could potentially like if I don't have anything but I happen to have higher value than you, I can still transact, by short selling. So that allows for transaction happening all the time. On top of the continuous distribution, continuous valuation, the probability that my value is equal to your value is 0, the measure 0 event. So for these two things, any meeting will lead to transactions. Thanks for that point. Yes. Anything else? Okay. So well, you can kind of think about this like we have to solve for this value function. We have nice form here. But then to solve the value function, I need the phi, right? And then phi has to satisfy these conditions, right? And that has the p's and q's in here that is coming from the value function, right? So this is, so solving a bilateral trade model with an unrestricted holding is typically considered as a very difficult problem because you have to solve the two things at the same time. It's a complex fixed point problem. So how people have addressed this problem is to make sure that the endogenous distribution of asset holding doesn't matter when it comes to transactions. How can you do that? One is to have no heterogeneity in the value or other exogenous attributes of the traders. Then I don't care the distribution of who I'm going to meet next. Or if your asset position is 1, 0, so it's not how much I'm going to transact, whether I'm going to transact or not. At that point, then also distribution doesn't matter because what I care about is your value and my value. So this, without these tricks, we don't have these tricks. We have the continuous asset holding, and then we allow for heterogeneity of the people and valuations. So it's a difficult problem, but then Usulu came up with this like a quadratic utility function. Now then that's where, where the quadratic function is coming from. I'm not him, so I cannot really explain as well as he did. Like basically he can come up with a Kara, like you start with a Kara utility function, again you can get there. Okay, so here the utility function is a quadratic in A, and also, like a new A, so if you take the marginal utility, then it's just going to be separable, right? So it's nice. With that, then he shows that there's a unique stationary equilibrium exists, which is really nice. We like uniqueness for the estimation purposes. Equilibrium exists, and also he characterized the equilibrium. So we don't even have to solve it because he solved it for you. The reason for all this is, because marginal utility is linear, that helps with the price and quantity part. So this part will be also linear in A. So that really helps. When you take the derivative. Yeah, so that's where things work. Okay, now we kind of closed it, the model. So no longer talking about the model here. So the takeaway is that we have the equilibrium, uniqueness, we characterized it. Then now what? Then is identification. So we already know what the primitives are. And then we're going to assume that we have all the transaction, price, and quantity, and timing. And then for that question you asked, because of the model assumptions, and which doesn't seem bad except for the short selling assumption, yeah. Trade is going to always occur when there's a meeting. And of course, you can change the assumptions here and there. Then there will be a situation where a meeting does not always end up with a trade. Then we don't have this nice situation that with the timing data, we can directly observe the meeting rate. We're going to just start with the discount rate as just assumed. So the remaining parameters are just utility, the flow utility, the value distribution, and liquidity shock. Bargaining parameter, again, is assumed to be 1/2. Okay, so now what kind of data do we have? Let's start with the best scenario, where we have for each individual investor and time, you observe the asset holding and their valuation U. Suppose we have such nice data. Then, like amazing, everything is basically observed. We have the liquidity shock observed because we see the A changes, nu changes, distribution nu is observed. We observed the equilibrium object exactly, right? What is the distribution of asset holding and the valuation, and then price and quantity rules. My state and your state, price and quantity all solved. So then only remaining thing is the utility function. How are we going to get that? Basically from the price and quantities that we observe. So suppose we fix some parameter for utility. And then we can solve for value function. Usulu already solved it for us, so we don't even have to do it. Oh, by the way, he did it by guess and verify. We don't have to worry about it. Doing value function, we can get the PQ. So we can just iterate until we have the same P and Q. Yeah? Do we see any problem here? Anyone? Is there anything wrong? There is one problem, which is the model will be falsified by the data, in the sense that you may see, two transactions, same state, so y prime, another transaction, same y prime. I would imagine in the data, PQ may not be always the same. Yeah, because model is approximation of the world, and it's not going to happen. So what are we going to do then? Any idea? Measurement? Yes, you can add unobservable, right? And easiest way to add unobservable would be measurement error. Yeah, it's like a. No, we cannot become macroeconomists. That'd be really hard. But then, so actually, let's go back. So easiest thing people can do is observe P and Q is measured with error, right? That's what people would usually do. But then how can you justify P and Q, are observed with error? I'm coming from transaction data, that's pretty reliable source. But then good news is that you don't have to worry about this because you would not have such a data. However such a data would have, right? You would never observe the value, right? So more realistic case is that you're going to observe the asset holding. Hopefully, that's also not easy to get. To get the asset holding, your data should be such that you have a investor identifier, and then can follow this person's transactions. which is not a good, not likely data that you're gonna have. For us, we have the dealer ID, but not the investor ID. We'll talk about that in a bit. So like in the best possible scenario, you're gonna get the asset holding, but not the value. So that's where you don't have to worry about the falsification of the model. Okay, so in this case, so then we're gonna go to black box, right? So we have so many things they have to estimate in one queue based on what do we observe, P and Q, right? Because the transactions, P, Q timing already used up for the meeting rate. So remaining is the P and Q. What we really observe is a joint distribution of P, Q, asset holding of two people, right? So, and then this, we can observe the joint distribution because random matching, right? So there is, sometimes some A prime meets, sometimes another A prime meets. That's why we can get a joint distribution. So again, the variation is coming from random matching here. And that from that joint distribution, we want to identify so many things. But when it comes to the process, I mean, we can assume those parameters, and then we're just gonna solve for value function, matching P and Q. Then, because what we observe is a joint distribution of PQA A prime, we're just gonna come with some moments, and we're gonna match the moments as opposed to matching P and Q function. Everyone follows this? And then, I want to talk about identification really nicely, but then I look at the equations and I cannot say too much, right? Other than just because I have the, P and Q, how is that solved? And then there's a function of my parameters, and would there be, can I solve P and Q, can I solve my parameters as a function of what we observe? It doesn't really work in the sense that I cannot solve these parameters as function of what we observe. What we have is just a system of nonlinear equations, and then whether that solution is unique, that's a mathematician's problem, not my problem, think about Jacobian and everything. So we don't really have a very good identification. For our exercise, we have more variation than this situation, so we'll talk about that later. That does help, but I still cannot say that I have a proof of identification. These models I've never seen a real proof because it's rare to have a closed form solution for these value functions and the distribution of asset holding. And then from there, how can you go moving forward and to prove the identification? Some hand-wavy arguments have been there, and if you can make some progress, that'd be lovely. But it is difficult, and we don't have that either. Okay, now we are done with the simplest model. Yes?
Should the newest need to be drawn IID?
Yes. Does it have to be the case? So you want some unobserved heterogeneity. Some people have some different distributions than other people. Okay, so let's think about this. So you're thinking that there is some sort of time correlations. If I drew a high value today, then I may draw a high value tomorrow. That is sort of there in the sense that I may keep my current value, right? Without. So if I get higher value, you're more likely to get higher value. So for that purposes, I think that's more of a directed search versus a random search, right? Because what matters is my partner's value will be kind of correlated with my value. That has not been really estimated yet, so maybe you can think about that.
Was that sorting, or was it the search technology?
I think it's a search technology. No?
Your statement about me being correlated with my partner.
Right. Because I might be directed search. I may just go with I know that who's going to be high value or something like that.
But I can generate sorting and matches with random search too, right?
How?
So for example, Peter's work, my work, acceptance probability to enter into a match with somebody depends on the types involved. So you're randomly searching, but you're logistically going into the match and engaging in bargaining or in the activity of the match, depending on the values of the people involved. And so now once you get those values in, you can make the consummation of the match depending on the types involved.
I guess in our case, you will always you always have a transaction.
Right, but this is more of a technology thing as opposed to like sorting outcome. Like I think you're emphasizing sorting as opposed to the particular technology that is used in order to get people together. So the directed search would be more of a posting kind of idea.
Yes, that's right.
And that you can post into direct sub-markets. This is maybe going into too much detail.
No, I think that's a great point. But also in practice, so that I'm studying, especially financial markets, is the investor versus dealer. The dealer and investor transact. And you may usually think that dealer's value is not going to be dealer specific because dealer may have some more access to centralized market or something like that. So there I don't have to worry about the correlation. But in this particular case, investor meeting, then that's of a concern. But there could be some markets where two different investors meet, then that would be something, and you guys can talk and see if there's something you can do if you have something in mind. Yeah.
But I don't know if that's what he was referring to, but you might have correlation across values because of aggregate shocks. You know, so that you're assuming that the liquidity shocks are independent across people, but it could be that, you know, the market is such that, you know, everybody has a liquidity shock, or, you know, and that creates correlation in values, you know, even with random matching. Right? But there's no aggregate shock in this kind of,
In this model, yeah. Just let me think about this. In this one, yeah, we don't have it. So I guess the question is whether the distribution of new can be time dependent.
Right. If you have like an aggregate state like that, and that would create correlation.
Right. I don't know about the closed form solutions or existence. I think will probably work, but the uniqueness I'm not sure. But estimation-wise, it's probably possible.
People have done that. There's been examples of that. So like a business cycle kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't have anything that comes to mind. The papers I mentioned, I don't think they have those things in there. Yeah, yeah.
So I thought I heard a little bit like you confirming Bob Miller's kind of point that, well, you know, if we get to observe the data perfectly and if we see the types, we're going to have a problem understanding the variation in the data. And so to some extent, the heterogeneity becomes a way of understanding the data. But from an estimation point of view, you're then also saying there is a variation in the data that's going to identify heterogeneity. And if and some of your initial motivating questions were about the impact of frictions and then also the possibility of heterogeneity mattering.
Yes.
In this particular setup, there is such a thing as pure price dispersion among homogeneous individuals. It doesn't happen in bargaining, but it happens in posting. So Judd has come up on a number of occasions here. So with that Judd, he put it more as an example of identical individuals trading at different prices
Right.
in frictional markets. We could, in principle, have chosen to think of this market in a posting setup where we could have generated price dispersion.
That's right. That's right.
Individuals.
Yeah. Which is the one that
It's a little esoteric. I'm
Yes,
in favor of
yes.
a heterogeneous agent, but if you're trying
I think that really, that's a good point, and I think that really leads to the question of identification, right? Because we can always, this can be very flexible, that the new distribution can have like one, the support can be just a dot, right? In that case, search frictions can explain everything. There's that question. Without the proof of identification, I cannot say any further, but take your point, yes. Okay, let me just enrich the model a little bit more. So as I said, most cases, investors still deal with dealers, so we're gonna include dealers. So you can assume that dealers have access to centralized interdealer market. That will just make things much easier because you don't have to worry about who the partner is and what the partner's value is going to be. That's determined by the market. I just need to solve my problem, so it's much easier. If it's decentralized interdealer market, it's still kind of similar situation, but dealers also face some search frictions when it comes to have transactions across dealers as well, so that adds some complications. But overall, estimation strategy doesn't really fundamentally change from what we just discussed before. Yes?
Are there models with both dealers and one-on-one transaction?
Dealer models where? What?
I have the dealer and I have a one-on-one, like direct transactions between the investor and the buyer.
Yeah, so there are models where, so I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but models where investors and dealers transact, and dealers transact. So such things exist.
No, but the question is whether I have a model where there are dealers as intermediaries and then I have direct transactions between the investors as well. So I can choose whether I go to the dealer or I do the transaction.
Ah, I see. For this context of OTC market, no, because OTC market always deals with the dealer. But I think Uslu's model can easily incorporate that because that model is actually anyone can be a dealer, and somebody who has better search technology becomes a dealer. So kind of like in spirit in that kind of setup. Okay. And then you can also have endogenous search. Why is the meeting rate fixed? It can be a function of something more fundamental. So say dealers choose meeting rate, lambda, there's a cost involved with it. Now that we observe the lambda, and then I can think of a first order condition. So first order condition for lambda is going to pin down the search cost for the dealer to choose particular lambda. So you're just adding one more equations and you observe lambda. So that's relatively easy, especially once you have the value function in. Okay, now some extra dimensions to consider. So directed search as opposed to random search and alternative matching technologies. My technologies that I've been thinking about was more like an IRS type. All the literature in this line of literature is IRS, in increasing return scale. But you can come up with different matching technologies. And perhaps you can also see if you can identify those things. Nash bargaining assumes complete information, right? But it's possible that maybe dealers know more than the investors. So maybe dealers know investor situation, but the investor does not know dealer situation or something like that. Then we cannot use Nash bargaining anymore, right? Because Nash bargaining solution is P and Q is a function of all the states of buyer and seller. So how are you going to deal with that? I'm not sure. You guys can figure out, or we can figure out later. And also here, you may have noticed that we are only working with one asset. In reality, investors have a lot of different assets and make the decisions. Dealers have also different assets. So portfolio choice, multiple assets, that's also another dimension to think about. Any questions? Okay. How much time do I have left?
Probably
20 minutes? Okay.
You started at 1:30, right? So that makes it 25 minutes?
25. So in the remaining 25 minutes, I want to talk about my paper with Julia Brancaccio about search frictions and product design in the municipal bond market. So I have a lot of things written there. Context is a municipal bond market in the US.
I didn't realize you were about to switch out of the over-the-counter market. I'm curious, in the over-the-counter market, is there an interest in thinking about long-term relationships between investors and intermediaries?
Yes, yes, that's also, I should have put a yes, yes.
Strikes me as an interesting match.
Yes, yes. Difficulty in the data is that you have the dealer information, you have dealer ID oftentimes, you don't have investor ID. However, for institutional investors, then we can get information about that. So we can study long-term relationship of the institutional investors and the dealers, I think. I know the UK data has investor ID as well. If you have access to it, the data is there. You can study that too. But they're definitely interested in there. I think that might be the reason why centralized platform is not really working well in these markets.
So much of the labor search literature is about long-term relationships, right? And kind of interesting to apply into a market like this. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, please. Okay, so going back to the paper. So context is municipal bond market. And again, a lot of things written there, and our context is, okay, people are curious about what if the bonds are more standardized, because bonds often have a lot of strings attached, like call options and things like that, that makes it hard to evaluate what the value is, especially when the transactions are not very frequent. So it's a decentralized market, transactions happen sometimes, it's not like happening all the time, and the valuations may change and how we're gonna evaluate it. On top of that, the bond has a lot of stuff in there. And so like call options and interest rate is floating, it's not fixed, and how can people evaluate that really well. So these kind of complications complicated structure of the bond may make the search frictions even harder. And then the question is, maybe that will benefit some dealers. Is it the case? So usually the idea that when you have search frictions, then the firms can benefit from the search frictions because that will give you a market power. So given all that, is there some producers benefit from making very complex products, and if so, the regulations could be helpful. So that's basically the background of the paper in the context of the municipal bond market. And I think one of the reasons that financial markets is kind of like, there is some barrier to financial markets is you have to understand the institution a little bit. So as a presenter, also I have to explain the market carefully, so it takes time. So let me just try like in one slide for our paper, for the model, so that you can understand the model. So just imagine like a school district nearby where you live needs some gym and wants to have about $100,000. Is it reasonable? Assume that that's reasonable. It's probably not reasonable. $10 million, yeah, for gym, yeah. Really, really nice gym, $10 million gym. Imagine that. You can't get the money right away. The taxes cannot pay for it, so you're going to issue bonds. So you need some like maybe JP Morgan or something, like some bank that will give you $10 million right away. And then in return, I'm going to give this contract, this bonds, right? So the bonds will say, we're going to give this coupon this much every 6 months. I may have some call options and all sorts of things like that, right? And interestingly, when you do that, JP Morgan comes in, then give me my $10 million. They design the bond structure together. So they negotiate like how I'm gonna, like am I going to add call options, what the coupon rate is going to be like. Is it going to be variable or is it going to be fixed, and all sorts of things. And then that JP Morgan is going to work as a dealer in the secondary market. So, so what happens is that then JP Morgan bought these bonds, $10 million bonds, at some certain price. And then they're going to sell it to the investors. That's called primary market. Investors buy this, and then some point, again, I want to buy a house or something. I want to sell it to the market. That's a secondary market. To sell it, you need to find a dealer, and that dealer is often JP Morgan as well as potentially other dealers. And what's interesting in this market is, again, there's very, very low liquidity. And underwriter, I call JP Morgan is the underwriter. Underwriter has this unique experience of selling these bonds in the beginning to the investors. So the JP Morgan knows who likes this bond, who doesn't like the bond, who owns this bond right now. So when my customer comes in, I want to sell this bond, then he can easily find who to sell, yeah? As opposed to some other dealer that doesn't have experience of selling the bonds in the beginning. So JP Morgan tends to be the main dealer when it comes to secondary market, and then JP Morgan can make lots of money out of these transactions. And you can imagine that when the bond is more and more complex, JP Morgan will the value of JP Morgan's experience of selling in the beginning, that knowing the clientele who would be interested in this bond, is going to be more valuable. Because if it's a simple bond, then anyone can find who may want this bond. It's a very complex bond, so it's targeted to a particular set of clientele, and the JP Morgan knows it. So maybe JP Morgan benefit from having a very complex bond. So that's our story. But that aside, the key thing for you to know for the model is the bond design is determined as a negotiation outcome between the government and the underwriter, and then secondary market happens. That's the market we just talked about. Okay? Yeah?
Should I think of the final person who buys this being an individual, or, for example, JP Morgan, Chase Bank?
Great point.
Sort of local whatever that the investors have no idea.
Yes, 75% individuals. Yes. Because of tax benefits that comes with a municipal bond, institutional investors are not too interested because they don't get the tax benefits. Yeah. Okay. I talked about complex bonds, so you can just imagine having call option. So is it good to have a call option in the bond from the government's point of view? So call option is going to be like if the market interest rate goes down and down and down, I put my municipal bond at 4%, now it's 2% market rate. I want to buy it and then reissue the bond at 2%. Then I will save the 2%. You see, that's the call option. Good for the government because I can lower the payment. But then from the investor's point of view, you have to kind of put that potential cases into the valuations. And again, transaction doesn't happen very often, so it may just increase the frictions in search frictions in this market for secondary transactions. And then that's going to be translated into the interest costs because from the investor's point of view, this complex bond, if I buy it, I know that it will be harder to sell in the future. So to make me buy this one, I need to be compensated for by higher interest rate. So from the government's point of view, I may get lower rate in the future if I can refinance it by having the call option. But then today I may have to pay higher coupon rate because buyers do not like this search frictions and higher liquidity. So that's that. So what the paper does is the one I just talked about. If this bond is very complex, there will be search frictions will be higher. Government will benefit from flexibility. All these things we show it using instrumental variable, using regressions. We show that's the case. So we emphasize a trade-off. And then we think about the model to study counterfactual where bonds are regulated to be simple. Okay? So that's why we use structural model to the counterfactuals and welfare analysis. And then we motivate that using instrumental variable approach. You might be interested in the instrumental variable, that is the state government regulations on government official ethics. So you can look at the paper if you guys are interested. So that the regulation changed over time across states. The panel variation was helpful, and then we argue that that can satisfy exogeneity assumption. Okay. I don't think anyone would be that interested in the numbers and stuff. So what I can just tell you here, out of the structural market, structure estimation, what I get the search cost number for underwriters and dealers separately. I can think about how much investors value the complexity of bond. I can estimate how much government value complexity of bond out of the structural estimation. And then, again, what if the use of non-standard provisions, these call options, is limited, but then coupon rate has to be still negotiated? What will happen? We solve the model and estimate, we solve the model counterfactual analysis, and that's the results. Okay. As usual, I'm not too interested in the result itself, so let's talk about model and estimation. I think that's what you guys are interested in. I have about 10 minutes or 10 minutes? Oh. Okay. 5 minutes?
10 to 15.
10 to 15. Okay. Good. So we have two layers. Like the first layer is the negotiation of bond design between the government and the underwriter. Yeah. So when they negotiate, what do they negotiate over? How complex the bond is, what the interest rate should be, and then price that underwriter has to pay so that the government is happy to sell this bond. So usually 10 million bond is sold. Government will get less than 10 million, and that difference is often called underwriter fee. Because like you get the lump sum money right away, you have to give something to the underwriter, and underwriter did a lot of market research for you for that. And then after that, there will be trading. That's going to happen. That's decentralized market. We are basically using the model that we just saw, but then we are making some more, we are adding some bells and whistles so that it's more attached to the more close to the setup that we have. And then at the end of the day, from this, we can solve the value function of the underwriter that will show why underwriter might benefit from having more complex bond. This is not very elegant, but what can you do? I'm going to add the observed heterogeneity X, unobserved heterogeneity in there, unobserved only to the researcher, so that you can kind of see the estimated objects. Okay. So I have a lot of things written there, but the main thing I want to take away, especially we are interested in a decentralized market, is that at origination, underwriter's payoff, value function of underwriter VU, is a function of bond attributes, which is complexity S, coupon rate R, other attributes that are exogenous, minus F. And then we are interested in solving the VU by solving for the decentralized market. Yeah? And then there will be government officials' payoff, Nash bargaining. Now let's talk about the trading part. Okay. So we have large population of investors and dealers. We have the measure of investors, MI, and dealers measure MD. Here, this is bond. There is the end point. It matures at some point. There is no more coupon coming out, right? So we're going to think about the finite horizon. And then continuous time model. Investors meet dealers. You have to meet dealers to trade. Meeting another investor doesn't really help. And the discount rate delta. Floor utility, we have this ugly form. What can you do? What we do here is this quadratic form. Now the first part, you get the coupon, and then I have log there. Why do we have log there? It's really ugly. You know, if you get the coupon, you get the coupon, right? Is it because in the government side, when we solve the first order condition, we need some concavity? That's why we put it in. That's the real reason. But in the paper, what do we say? Like if the coupon rate is higher and higher and higher, there might be some default probability in there, so you may internalize that. Okay, so too much interest that you may not like that because there might be some default. Not great explanation, but we had to have that, otherwise we couldn't solve it. But you have the value, okay, so coupon is explaining why you like the asset. And then you have the quadratic part there, and then the way we justify that is the opportunity cost of holding the asset. And that's the kappa I. The taste type is coming from the distribution, and then we allow that to depend on time, tau. So yeah, tau and complexity and bond other attributes. We still have the liquidity shock alpha, if you remember alpha, buying house, and then quadratic utility there. I explained it there. Micro foundation, if you're interested, you can look at a particular footnote in Uslu's paper that explains a lot, and there's appendix material that explains how Kara utility can get to there. Dealer's flow utility is basically same as the investor. What's different is the nu is no longer drawn. It's just a fixed number. And then, of course, the opportunity cost of holding the asset, kappa, can be different between dealers and investors. That's why I have the subscript D there. And at the end, you're going to get something out of the holding bonds at the end of the maturity. These omegas are different for dealers and investors to account for the fact that dealers do not get the tax benefits. And then dealers, when it comes to inter-dealer market, meeting rate is fixed. When it comes to dealer to investor market, they choose the meeting rate. The cost of choosing meeting rate is a convex function of lambda, so exponential function of exponential lambda with some coefficient. The coefficient depends on dealer's type. So some dealers can have very high cost of finding someone. Some dealers have very low cost depending on the geographic concentration or like experience in the past. So I think you could do unobserved heterogeneity there. In our paper, we just assume that we know who is which type. So that type is phi naught. So we don't know the phi naught value, but we assume in the estimation we know who is which type. In any case, some dealers may have high cost than other dealers. And then we have network effect, which is that as the more trade you have, your cost may go down. So that is incorporated in this function. This slide, I think you know everything by now. P and Q is determined by Nash bargaining. Yeah, so I'm going to pass that. So I already explained the model then. So you can see the changes to the model that we just talked about is finite horizon part. We bring in the dealers. Yeah. And the way we bring in a dealer is that dealer is basically the same as investors, but then the value is not drawn from some distribution, it's a fixed value. And then the inner dealer market is with some frictions, dealer to investor market, endogenous search frictions there. Yeah, so that's the added part to the simple model that we talked about. Okay, so the equilibrium part, I don't think it's that useful to talk about the value function. I'm just gonna, you can take a look at it. Investors, same thing. I want to mention here that we have close recursive characterization of state distribution that really helped us when it comes to computation. Because when we're solving the model, we need to solve, again, the value function and the phi at the same time, the distribution at the same time. We know at least this much, so that really helped. Okay. Yeah, if people are really interested in the content of the paper, then this is an important thing, but then I'm just going to pass given the time and everyone's tired. Let me just end with the estimation a little bit, because I think it's kind of fun. When you think about like coming up with an estimator, using the data, that's the most fun part for me to do research. You know, how can we have, how can I come with an estimator? So remember, the primitives is dealer and investors' preferences, search costs, bargaining parameter, government officials' preferences. Those are the primitives. What we observe, again, price, quantity, timing trades. So that, I mentioned it before, we only observe the dealer states, but not the investor state. So that's really unfortunate, but we basically integrate over. And then bond attributes and regulation. So the one we just talked about how to estimate things is in the first step. So we do that for each bond. We estimate all the trading market parameters for each bond. Where is the law of larger numbers coming from? Transaction. We have a lot of transactions for a given bond. And given the idea that we just talked about, basically that, but then we have more complication, interdealer market, you know, the investor to dealer market. But anyway, we do that. Once you have that, parameters, we want to know how these parameters, so for example, search friction parameter, search cost parameter is a function of how complex the bond is. We allow that would also depend on unobserved heterogeneity. So to get this causality there, we need some instrument. So again, the same instrument that we use for the reduced form analysis is used to get the relationship between, say, search cost and complexity of bond. And then using the first, so assuming the chosen bond attributes, complexity and coupon rate, is going to satisfy the first order condition. Now that we know everything about the underwriter, because we already solved the value function and everything, only thing that's left is government preferences. So first order condition is going to give me government preferences. So then you might be kind of curious about the first step estimation, but I think it might be good to just close. You can just read the paper, and I'm happy to chat offline. Yeah. I have like a slide about some like a hand-wavy identification that no one would be interested in at this point. Just to close up, transaction data, I think, gives them some great opportunity to think about, you know, role of intermediary, search frictions. I think and then this data availability for different markets, I think, opens up opportunities for you. A lot of open questions are there. There are lots of theory, but, you know, not many empirical work that actually uses a theory. So I think it's a really exciting area. But always caveat is that you don't have to go to the most complicated model. In fact, the simplest is the best, right? Reduced form is the best, and then static, and then, you know, dynamic. So don't go into the dynamic first, right? But if you're interested, that's great, right? But just for your sake, I just always choose approach based on your questions. And all the papers that are mentioned in this slide is in the papers folder, so you can take a look at them. Thank you.